This committee this committee meeting is being convened by electronic means as authorized under Part 14 of the Procedure Bylaw. As such, committee members may participate in person or by electronic means. If any committee member loses connection during the voting process, we have staff on hand to facilitate getting you back online quickly while we suspend the voting process. The contact information has been circulated to you. Members of the public can view the proceedings via the live stream on the YouTube link, which will be posted to X via @VanCityClerk. Video of committee members speaking, presentations, amendments, and vote results will be projected to viewers when available. Committee members are reminded to please enable their video to ensure quorum is maintained during the meeting under Section 14.13 of the Procedure Bylaw if they are oh, well, actually, I see Councilor Dominato's here, so I don't have to read the virtual stuff. Thank you. In case of an emergency where we need to evacuate this building, I would like to direct your attention to the exit. There are 2 exits beyond the glass doors and to the left. If the glass doors are obstructed, please direct your attention to the 4 exits in this chamber. Please use the stairs, do not use the elevator. I'd also like to highlight that there is a defibrillator located at the end of the hallway outside of the council chamber. We acknowledge that we are on the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and we thank them for having cared for this land and look forward to working with them in partnership as we continue to build this great city together. I also want to take a moment to recognize the immense contributions of the City of Vancouver staff, who work hard every day to make our city an incredible place to live, work, and play. Clerk, may we have the roll call, please?
Yes, Councillor Kirby-Young. Councillor Dominato. Councillor Fries, the chair. Councillor Boyle. Councillor Montague.
Present.
Archie Johnson, external representative. We were expecting him, but is not here at the moment. Sophia Sui is absent today, and Carol Bellringer, also external representative. Thank you. The meeting has quorum, Chair Fry.
Fantastic. Thank you, Clerk. Before we begin, I have some announcements. Any comments on the agenda item can be sent to the committee using the web form on the city's website. A link to that form will be posted on X @VanCityClerk. I also want to note the City of Vancouver's longstanding commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, including utmost respect for all genders. I remind committee members that when we're addressing speakers and staff, we will avoid using gendered honorifics and instead refer to that person by first and last name, role, or title. There are 2 memorandums and 2 reports on today's agenda. I'd also like to remind committee members that if an amendment is brought forward, they must be submitted to the clerk in final written form before the committee member introduces them. Please ensure the clerk has received your amendment by emailing it directly to Tina Penny and Cassia Nasrallah. Also, we want to acknowledge we do have some of the Auditor General Committee staff here. Jenny Lau and Felix Chu are joining us. Thank you for joining us. And here's Archie arriving in person. Hi, Archie. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we're going to begin with our first item, the Auditor General Committee 2024 meeting schedule. And I'll now invite Auditor General Mike McDonnell to introduce the item.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. The committee is required to meet 30 days within receiving a report. It's supposed to meet 3 times a year at least, and within 20 days of being requested by me. To facilitate that, we have before you a schedule that is also required to be agreed upon before February 28th of each year. So we're a little bit ahead of schedule, which is great. The schedule you have in front of you has a total of 8 planned meetings. 5 are already confirmed with agenda items, and 3 are in place as placeholders in case a report should come out or there are any other items that need to be discussed. If we don't have any agenda items coming forward, those meetings will be canceled by me in consultation with the chair. That is it.
Thanks, Mike. Are there any questions to the Auditor General or staff? Councillor Kirby-Young.
Yeah, I don't have a question, but just to note for the committee, because I know how important quorum is, that I'm not available on the proposed February 22nd date. So just flagging that if the committee goes ahead with that, that will require all the other members or the alternate to be here. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Kirby-Young, and I'm just checking. Great. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Kirby-Young. I See the clerks have taken note of that. Would somebody like to move a motion? A move by Councillor Dominato, seconder, Councillor Boyle. All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none. This concludes item 1 on the agenda. Second item, Auditor General Committee External Liaison Appointment. I'll now invite the Deputy City Clerk to introduce the item.
Thank you, Chair Fry. And I just want to add that this is an item to really just confirm the reappointment of Archie to the committee, who has agreed if you wish to so reappoint. The terms of reference for the committee does give you the authority to do so, independent of council. And I think I already mentioned Archie Johnson has agreed to an additional 3-year term.
Fantastic. Do we have any questions for the city clerk? All right, seeing none. Would somebody like to move the motion? Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Carbian.
I just have one clarification because I just heard the clerk say that the Auditor General has the right to appoint independent of council, but the recommendation states that the committee appoint the liaison member. So I'm just looking for just a procedural question for clarification if we need to appoint the committee or if this can be done without us, because I just heard 2 different things.
Yep.
Yeah. So the terms of reference for the Auditor General Committee were approved by council, and council delegated the authority to the 5 members of council members on the committee to appoint the external representatives. So was that the question?
Well, so, yeah, I thought I had, maybe I misheard. So I thought you had said that the Auditor General had the right to appoint independently. But you're saying it is the committee, it is not the Auditor
It's the
General?
committee that can appoint. Yes, that's written right into the terms of reference.
Okay, and so this would go as an information piece to council then? So council would not have to affirm this decision of the committee as they do the other decisions?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Kirby-Young. Okay, seeing no further questions, would somebody like to move the motion? Moved by Councillor Kirby-Young, seconded by Councillor Montague. Any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none. All right, great. Thank you. Moving on to the next item, audit of Park Board revenue management. We are now about to receive a report and presentation on audit of Park Board revenue management, and I'm now going to invite the Auditor General to introduce and present the item. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Chair Fry, and good morning, committee members. If I may, I'd like to start by expressing my thanks to Archie Johnson for agreeing to stay on for another term. Your continued service in support of my mandate is greatly appreciated. So thank you, Archie. Okay. So today I'm presenting the results of our audit of Park Board revenue management. Next slide, please. This was my first audit of the Park Board. I included the Park Board in my 2023 audit plan and was formally invited by the board in accordance with the Auditor General bylaw on January 16th to conduct a performance audit. My initial intention was to focus on coordination of services between the city and the Park Board. However, as my team began planning, it became apparent that this was in fact a better time for us to look at the management of revenue. So that's what we did. I extend my appreciation to the Park Board for the invitation to conduct this work, and to the Park Board senior leadership team and staff for their assistance and cooperation throughout the audit, as well as for the positive response to the audit's 6 recommendations. I look forward to observing their implementation of the action plan in the coming months. Have the next slide, please. The Park Board manages 250 public parks and beaches, the Van Dusen Botanical Garden, the Blodell Conservatory, and a large public recreation system of community centers, pools, rinks, fitness centers, golf courses, street trees, marinas, sports fields, playgrounds, and various activities associated with all of those facilities. The Park Board collects a range of fees and charges to recover costs for access to some of these services and facilities. Some fees are collected with the intention of recovering costs either in whole or in part, while others generate surplus revenues to fund other services. Examples of fees collected include golf green fees, mortgage fees at the Burrard Civic Marina, recreation admission passes at community centers. Between 2018 and 2022, the Park Board collected an average of $56 million annually from fees and charges. Next slide, please. The objective of this audit was to determine if the Vancouver Board of Parks and Recreation operated an effective framework to achieve revenue-related objectives for its assets and services that generate revenue. The audit focused on the period between January 1st, 2018 and June 30th, 2023, and included policies, practice, and administrative procedures the Park Board produced prior to 2018 that were still in use during the audit period. Next slide, please. We set out to examine whether the Park Board had revenue-related objectives to support its strategies for revenue-generating services and whether there was an effective framework in place to support the achievement of these objectives. In addition, we examined whether the Park Board defined performance metrics in alignment with its objectives for revenue-generating services. Next slide, please. We didn't include a financial audit of the completeness and accuracy of revenue and cost information provided by the Park Board, nor did we assess the internal controls over revenue collection at Park Board facilities. Also not in scope are fees for services and programs jointly managed by the Park Board and external associations as defined by joint operating agreements or lease arrangements. Lastly, we didn't include bylaw fines in parks and recreation spaces as they technically aren't fees. Slide, please. Overall, we concluded that while some processes were used to inform fee setting, the Park Board didn't operate an effective framework for achieving revenue-related objectives for its revenue-generating assets and services during the audit period. Although the Park Board used a number of different factors to inform fee setting, a comprehensive fee setting framework wasn't in place, and we identified several opportunities for improvement, leading to 6 recommendations. I'll now ask Audit Principal Jenny Lau, who was the engagement leader for this audit, to present the detailed findings and resulting recommendations. Jenny?
Thanks, Mike. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to be talking about our findings and recommendations from the audit. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the first area we examined was related to revenue management in context of the Park Board's overall funding structure. We looked to the Vancouver Charter, which empowers the Park Board to set direction, including fees and charges for parks and recreation services, and gives City Council the authority to commit funds for expenditures. Based on this, we assessed whether Park Board strategies that provided direction included funding or revenue-related objectives. We found that while the Park Board indicated in various strategies the need for funding to achieve its strategic goals, beyond existing budgeting processes, did not proactively engage with City Council to ensure that funding would be made available for its strategies to be implemented. Next slide, please. Additionally, for new initiatives such as Think Big that directed Park Board staff to explore new opportunities for net new revenue generation to address growing maintenance and asset renewal needs. Because the Park Board is required to obtain City Council approval for expenditures, both the expenditures of funds to generate new revenues and the use of new revenues generated will require approval from City Council. So this leads us to our first recommendation. Thank you. To help ensure that funding is made available for implementation of its strategic priorities, the Park Board should proactively engage with City Council as it develops current and future strategies. The next area we examined was service delivery objectives for revenue-generating services. We examined whether each service line had defined service level objectives to guide decision-making in areas such as cost management, resource allocation, and future investments. We found that the Park Board had defined service level objectives for some service areas, but this was not defined for all. The Park Board had objectives for the Van Dusen Botanical Garden, the Bloedel Conservatory, various recreation services, and food and beverage. However, this was not documented for the Burrard Civic Marina, parking, golf, pitch and putt, and the Stanley Park train. So more specifically, did not consistently have elements such as clearly defined service objectives, including the rationale for providing the service in the short and medium term, identified funding requirements or resources and assets needed to operate and maintain operations and service levels, and asset renewal or service development plans with anticipated benefits or return on investments. So this leads us to our second recommendation, which is for revenue generating service areas. The park board should define and document service delivery objectives to guide operational decision-making and future investment. Plans should provide short to medium-term outlooks for service areas and be regularly reviewed and updated. As it relates to the fee setting, we examined the methods the park board used to set fees. First of all, we found that the park board defined revenue objectives for services and used a number of different factors to inform fee setting, such as marketplace comparison, rate of inflation, user engagement surveys, while considering affordability and accessibility. This was guided by the user fees and charges and economic access policies. However, we found an opportunity to improve fee setting processes to establish a comprehensive fee setting framework. Elements of a comprehensive fee setting framework include method and criteria for defining where fees should and should not be charged and to what extent, the intended cost recovery ratios or percentage of costs that fees would cover, and the types of costs intended to be recovered through fees. So to illustrate, we have an example here of how services could be categorized by revenue categories and their associated cost recovery ratios using a benefits-based framework. So this looks at services on a spectrum from those where fees are charged, to how much, to where fees are not charged based on the benefits provided. So on the very left hand of the slide there, we have services that tend to provide more user-based or individual-based benefits. And on the right, those tend to be services that provide more community benefits that foster overall health and wellness of the community. So in the first bucket there, we have income generating, where in this illustration, we have services 1A and A1 and A2. So under income generating, those are where user fees are meant to not only recover costs, but to generate surplus revenues. And those would also be where zero tax-based funding would be provided for those. And again, those services are then looked at as providing more individualized benefits that may be of entertainment or commercial in nature. And as we move down to the right of that spectrum, we move away from that where those services tend to provide more community-based benefits. So, for example, under the third bucket there, we have partial subsidization, where it was determined that they provide, both benefits to the community and individuals, where user fees would cover half of the costs associated with service delivery, and the other half would be provided through tax-based funding. And so this leads us to our next recommendation, where the park board should strengthen its fee setting processes by implementing a comprehensive fee setting framework. The revised framework should account for differences in the types of services provided between recreation services and the business services departments. The park board should also update its fees and charges policy to reflect adjustments to the fee setting processes outlined. And more specifically, the framework could include principles for determining revenue categories, the criteria to categorize services on various factors such as types of services, types of users, affordability, accessibility, methods for determining the service cost recovery ratio to enable performance tracking, the rationale and conditions for fee reductions and waivers, and a periodic process to reassess service categorizations. If we can move to the next slide as well. Thank you. The next area we looked at was transparency in fee setting. We found that the park board followed an annual process to set its fees that was made available to the public. Annually, Park Board staff presented proposed fees updates to the board for review and approval. The board reviewed fee proposals and provided decisions to either approve or request revisions to proposed fees. We have no recommendations in this area as the audit criterion was met. Next slide. Another component of fee setting is understanding the full cost of service delivery that enables a comprehensive view of financial performance and cost recovery levels. We examined the types of costs the Park Board used as inputs into the fee setting process. We found that for financial performance reporting, the Park Board focused on service delivery costs that were controllable by Park Board managers to promote accountability for operational service delivery. However, for fee setting, reporting did not include full costs. Next slide, please. Examples of costs that were not included were asset lifecycle replacement and renewal costs, administrative costs for things such as insurance, and shared costs of services provided by the city for items such as IT, financial services, human resources, and facilities maintenance. While these costs were allocated to the Park Board as a whole, they were not attributed to individual service areas at charged fees. So understanding full costs is important for services where fees are intended to recover costs fully or to generate surplus revenues, because not recovering full costs could result in unintended subsidization of some services and could mean a higher reliance on tax-based funding. Also, understanding full costs does not mean that full costs need to be charged, but it provides a complete picture of the cost of service delivery. So based on this, we recommend the Park Board should incorporate in its updated fee setting framework an evaluation of full cost for each service area to strengthen the correlation between fees charged and the underlying costs, and define the types of costs it intends to recover through its fees. Then to circle back on understanding the achievement of objectives, we examined whether the Park Board defined performance metrics to track the achievement of goals and objectives for assets and services that generate revenue. We found that the Park Board defined and reported on metrics for recreation services and championship golf in the city's service plan. However, performance metrics with set targets were not defined for other revenue-generating services. In terms of accuracy of performance metrics, we found that the Park Board generally calculated metrics consistently and accurately. There was one exception noted with a metric reported in 2020 and 2021 that was noted by the Park Board in the 2023 Service Plan Report. So this leads us to our fifth recommendation. The Park Board should define performance metrics for all revenue-generating service areas to enable monitoring and tracking of progress towards service delivery, revenue objectives, and overall strategies. Performance metrics should be meaningfully designed, have defined targets with timeframes for completion, have defined intervals and audiences for reporting, include up-to-date documented procedures for calculation, and include a process to ensure that they're calculated accurately. And our last finding now relates to financial performance reporting. We found that the Park Board did not include a comparison of actual revenues versus expenditures by service areas in its fees and charges report. It is important to provide this as it provides a perspective on the net surplus or loss for individual service areas and can assist in determining the achievement of revenue objectives and informing future fee setting. Based on this finding, we recommend that the Park Board report on actual revenues versus expenditures, including all relevant costs to track the achievement of revenue objectives for service areas. These are the findings and recommendations identified in the audit report, and I'll now hand the presentation back to Mike.
Thank you, Jenny. Happy to take any questions right now. I believe the General Manager, Parks and Recreation, is on the line virtually as well.
Sure, and perhaps at this moment, we can invite the general manager if he wants to make any comments on this, or we can just jump right into the general manager of Parks and Recreation, Steve Jackson's on the line.
Yeah, thanks. Good morning. Can you hear me? Just confirming.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Good morning. So thanks to the Auditor General Committee first for inviting me to speak this morning, and my thanks to Auditor General McDonnell and his team for completing the work. It was conducted respectfully and with diligence, and as a past auditor myself, I understand the efforts and time that goes into that. I just wanted to start by saying management has agreed with the findings and recommendations made by the Auditor General with respect to the performance audit on our revenue management at the Park Board. And many of the findings are consistent with items and processes that staff have identified over the years as well. The Park Board does operate a fairly unique system compared to other departments at the city. We do have, as Jenny noted, the way I categorize it, three different ways that we fund our services. One, through taxes, fully subsidized. Two, whether it be partially or fully recovered through user fees. And three, areas where we charge a fee that generates substantive revenues that can then be used to support other service lines. And based on those complexities, I do think it's important that we make improvements to our policies, our metrics, and our monitoring to make benefits, many of which will create transparency for our taxpayers and patrons as those who use our facilities want to see value for their money. The recommendations are substantial and will require investment of time and energy to make those implementations. We'll look to do this in a phased approach, looking to make those improvements where we see the greatest opportunity in the near term, and then subsequently in subsequent phases until we've completed all those recommendations. And last, just to close, a thank you again to the team who conducted the audit, but also a thank you to the staff who spent time and energy supplying the team with the information they needed to complete that work and answering any questions that were required from the group. And I'm happy to take any questions this morning as well that the committee may have. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, Steve. Opening it up for questions of the Auditor General or Parks General Manager, starting with Councillor Montague.
Thanks, Chair. My question is for the AG. I know there's 6 recommendations in the report here, but I was particularly interested in the recommendation number 1, it mentions the dual responsibility under the Vancouver Charter. I'm wondering if you can just expand on the Park Board making operational decisions or plans and the ability to actually implement those plans. And what's the effectiveness and efficiency, and do you see this in other organizations?
Well, in terms of expenditures, the Park Board's authority to spend is defined under the Vancouver Charter, Section 492. And under Section 492, the Park Board has to provide a detailed estimate of all of the receipts it's going to take in, so all the fees and revenues from every source, and all the expenditures of every kind. Those have to be detailed out. And that those are considered by council and adopted in whole or in part. And that offers the Park Board the authority then to go ahead and spend public funds. Under Section 493, sub 1, say by resolution of council, the Park Board cannot and shall not authorize or make any expenditures except those provided for the estimate as adopted by council. So it's quite rigorous in terms of the Park Board being limited in terms of how it can expend public funds. That's defined under the charter. As far as decision-making beyond that really wasn't in the scope of this particular audit, so I'm really not.
Do you see that dual responsibility in other organizations, and how effective or efficient is it?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Do you see that dual responsibility in other organizations, and if so, how effective or efficient is it?
Well, I think that's pretty consistent with any city department in the sense that there's an authorized budget that comes from council, and then the department spends funds in accordance with that budget, only and deviate to that only with council's authority.
Okay. Was there anything during your audit that I know the report is kind of sanitary, but is there anything in the audit that caused you concern at all during your audit time?
Really not in a position to speak to anything outside that which is actually in the report. As an auditor, I may have personal opinions on matters, but professionally, I can't say anything unless I have proof. And so anything that's in the report, we have documentation in support of. Anything beyond that, I don't think it would be appropriate for me to comment on.
Okay, maybe I'll ask the question this way. If you were to be invited back to do a second audit, what would that audit be on?
Well, in fact, I was invited back by the Park Board during our meeting when we presented this report to them last week on Monday. And at this time, um, I am inclined towards looking at the management of assets that the Park Board has. I believe that, you know, the assets that the Park Board looks after is a trust. It's a trust from previous generations to the current generation to look after and maintain for the enjoyment of us and for future generations. And so I think it's a really important thing that that be done well. And I think we've all heard that there are concerns about how certain Park Board assets have been maintained over the years, and I'd like to better understand how that works.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Montague. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks. I have kind of a bigger picture question, which is I'm wondering what the discussion looked like or any recommendations around how the Park Board balances revenue generation with the fact that it's not a business, it's a public service, and it has accessibility and equity goals to make sure that the services that it provides are available and accessible to residents across income levels. So how do we hit the right balance of cost recovery without blocking the public priority around access?
A very fair question. Thank you, Councillor Boyle. The framework that we proposed here takes that issue of accessibility and equity explicitly into consideration. As the general manager mentioned, the Park Board is a unique service provider as far as city services, because in fact, some of the services that it provides are more commercial in orientation than others. And so a one-size-fits-all approach just doesn't work. Hence, we've suggested that there really need to be 4 buckets, each with their own set of rules and considerations. There are certain ones that you would expect would perhaps be available. The funds from those proceeds, the proceeds from those activities would be available to fund other services that might be more appropriately fully subsidized. So we are looking at a whole spectrum in that regard.
Okay, I appreciate that, the balance of that. My second question is, and I'm not sure, well, you can tell me if you can answer this. Certainly what we hear from many past park boards is that there's been a challenge where the city hasn't adequately funded the park board, and so the park board has been limited in its ability to carry out its own mandate and strategies, as were mentioned, and to plan and invest in ways that would save money down the road. I'm wondering if you looked at or touched on those funding gaps over past years.
Yeah, that wasn't in the scope of this audit, but all I would say in general is that it's the dilemma of public service, but by its definition, that wants and needs are virtually unlimited, but resources are very finite.
Mhm.
So, but beyond that, I have no capacity to speak to that issue in relation to the park board.
Okay, fair enough. I'll leave my questions there. Thanks for this report.
Thanks, Councillor Boyle. Councillor Dominato.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for the presentation update this morning. I was just curious in the context of looking at the Park Board revenue management, did you examine foregone revenues based on looking at that framework for fees? And did you have an estimate of what that is?
Thank you. No, that was beyond the scope in the sense that fee setting is a policy issue that was the purview of the park board. And we were looking at whether the objectives that had been identified up front were likely to be met given the framework that was in place. And we found that the framework had gaps. So that hence the recommendations. But in terms of an actual dollar figure about foregone revenue, no, I don't have a figure for that. I'm sorry.
Okay, so that wasn't within scope. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thanks. External liaison, Carol Bellringer.
Thank you. Actually, I have 2 questions for the general manager. And one of them is around,
For Carol, just 1 second.
Yeah, thank
there he
you.
is. All right, thank you.
so it's not unusual for management to agree with the Auditor General, kind of goes with the territory. I guess where I'm wondering, are there any of the recommendations that you're a little unsure of? They're gonna, not too sure how you're actually gonna do it. in fact, maybe there are things you thought of in the past and you've been stopped. There's roadblocks. You're unable to do that. So my first question is just around any hesitation with any of the recommendations.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I think the biggest area that I would highlight that maybe causes some concern is just around cost per service and evaluating that in more detail. We don't have a great system right now in terms of collecting data in regards to our systems. Some services we do, particularly in recreation and our community centers. Obviously, we're tracking admissions and passes and things like that. But we do a lot of services just out in park spaces. It's really hard for us right now to know how many people are using every park and whether we've correctly funded that investment space based on use. So that's one area. I think the other piece is a little bit more just global in general. This is a significant amount of recommendations, and it is a significant amount of work. And we've obviously got, again, a finite finance team and a finance staff team who's going to be able to spend time on this. So we're going to make our best efforts to achieve the goals here in the timelines that we've committed to in the report and in our response back. But we're going to have to leverage, I think, some support from our colleagues in city finance as well to execute on this and be successful.
Thank you. So actually, my second question flows from that. And it was, when I was looking at the target dates for the recommendations, so it's everything from 24 to 27. So it's a fairly wide time frame. And I'm assuming, and maybe if you could confirm this, that it's the action plan that will make that more granular. Like it needs to get broken down into, like, what are the steps you're going to follow to get to the 27 in particular? Because there's a lot of time in between, and progress will be a positive thing. So do you know specifically when you'll have I heard within the next coming months, but more specifically, when will there be an action plan? And will it give something more to break down when certain parts of the recommendations will get completed?
Yeah. So we'll look early in the new year to start on that work to develop an action plan and really hone in on where the biggest bang for the buck, if you will, is on the first phases of implementation. Since receiving the report and working through this with the Auditor General's team, we've obviously then been deeply involved in developing our budgets and service plans since that time. So we haven't had a heck of a lot of time to actually dive into this and really develop a plan quite yet. I do think the timelines that we've committed to are aggressive. But I think being aggressive will sort of keep us on task and make sure that we try and do this as quick as possible because I do think there are gains to be had through this work. So I'm hopeful that maybe by the end of Q1 2024 we'll have a better sense of what areas we're going to tackle first and which recommendations will be completed sooner than later.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. Thanks, Steve. Okay, seeing no further questions on the queue, would somebody like to move a motion? By Councillor Dominato, seconded by Councillor Kirby-Young. Any discussion?
Ask the clerks to get the recommendation up on the screen, please. There we go. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. All right, is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll just call a vote. All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none? All right. This concludes item 3 on the agenda. Our next item and final item on the agenda is the report and presentation follow-up report on previous audit recommendations. I'll now invite Auditor General Mike McDonnell to introduce and present the item. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Chair Fry. I have a very brief presentation. Pop that up on the screen, please. Perfect. On to the next slide there. Great, thank you. Where my audits identify opportunities for improvement in the economy, efficiency, and/or effectiveness of the city's operations, I make recommendations aimed at addressing root causes. As Auditor General, I, quite appropriately, have no ability to compel the city to implement my recommendations, but I do ask Council to endorse them. And consistent with that approach, this committee's terms of reference requires it to follow up on the status of audit recommendations. This report represents the first of what will be a semi-annual publication to allow you to do just that. I ask city management to provide, in their own words, an update on the status of audit recommendations contained in the first 3 audit reports issued by my office. As representations of management, I provide no assurance regarding the completeness or accuracy of these statements. Instead, I invite you to consider whether the city management's plans to address audit recommendations are appropriate and whether the reported progress to date is adequate and plausible. This committee's terms of reference also allows it to ask for evidence. That's up to you if you feel it's appropriate, and I will facilitate any such request. City management is here to answer any questions that you may have. Can I have the next slide, please? Audited departments were asked to self-assess the progress under 4 categories. Fully or substantially implemented, which I feel is a fairly self-explanatory category. Alternative action taken. Taking action is both management's responsibility and its prerogative. If management can find alternative approaches that address the issues underlying a recommendation, I consider this both appropriate and a success. Partially implemented means some work is underway, and no substantial action means the department has not yet taken action. I don't take this as a rejection of the recommendation, but rather an acknowledgement that management needs to prioritize and that there's often a logical order in which actions need to be taken. Next slide, please. I'm pleased to see that of the 18 recommendations issued in the 3 audit reports released up to June of 2023, the city reports having fully or substantially implemented 5 and having taken alternative actions for another 2. While I've done no work that would allow me to comment on the veracity of these statements, I will say that it's gratifying to already see tangible progress being made during the short tenure of my office. And I look forward to seeing further progress in the next semi-annual follow-up report to be presented to Council in June of 2024. Happy to take any questions.
Oh, okay, fantastic. I don't see any questions on the queue. So would somebody like to move a motion? Move receipt by Councillor Dominato, seconded by Councillor Montague. Seeing no questions. Any discussion? All right, all in favor? Opposed? Seeing none. And this concludes item 4 on the agenda. And that, folks, is it. May we have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Montague, seconded by Councillor Kirby-Young. Thank you, everybody, and happiest of holidays to you all. See you next year.